So it's a great pleasure to introduce our keynote speakers for this morning, Professor Dede. Professor Dede, I'm so happy you're here. We met about 10 years ago when he kindly responded to an email I sent him asking for a meeting. And at that meeting, he provided so many life-changing advice for my PhD in CERT. And since then, he became an incredible mentor and colleague on my mind. So Professor Dede is currently a senior research fellow from Harvard Graduate School of Education, where he served for 22 years as a Timothy Reed professor. He is also a co-PI of an NSF-funded National Institute for Artificial Intelligence in Adult Learning and Online Education. And more recently, he is also a scholar at the Immersive Learning Research Network. His curriculum is so amazing and impressive. I really encourage you to go online and check on his foundational work. He is one of our pioneers on XR research, policy, and implementation in schools. Professor Dede, please welcome.
So, I'm here to talk about the intersection of AI and XR. And I want to begin because there are so many people claiming to be experts in AI, to give you a little background about me and AI, so that you can judge what I'm going to say accordingly. Over half a century ago, when I was a graduate student, I read the very first scholarly paper published on AI in education. And the author confidently concluded that by the end of the 1970s, we wouldn't need teachers anymore. Well, obviously, that wasn't a very good forecast. And in fact, I've lived through 9 hype cycles of AI since then. Every 5 years or so, enough progress is made that the optimists declare that we have digital deities, and the pessimists declare that the Terminator is coming. And every one of those 9 hype cycles, the extremists have been wrong. And they're also wrong in this, the 10th hype cycle, even though this one is a little bigger leap than the others. So what you're going to hear from me is a balanced view of AI that also includes some historical perspective in terms of understanding what's going on. And it may seem odd that I'm going to here at an XR conference, but I'm not going to use the words XR very often until about halfway through. But there's so much misinformation and disinformation, and I'm going to use a technical term here, bullshit, about AI, that I feel that I need half the talk just to sort out what it really is, because that's essential to understanding how it interacts with XR. So, as Anna mentioned, I'm co-PI for Associate Director for Research of the National AI Institute on Adult Learning and Online Education. Think of this as the institute that's about workforce entry, upskilling, and reskilling. This is one of 30 national AI institutes. Each one got 5 years and $20 million. We're now in the 5th year of our institute. And by describing what we've accomplished, you'll have kind of a strong baseline for what AI can do at this point in history, because the institutes have a lot of people who've been experienced in AI for a long time. And they also don't have an axe to grind. They're not trying to make $1 billion. They're not trying to produce products to sell. They're simply trying to understand what the limits are in AI at this point. But we'll start just by talking about the problem, because when you talk about technology, you begin with technology, you have a solution looking for a problem, which is never a good thing. So our institute centers on this issue of the transformation of the workforce. Now, there's a lot of reasons why people need to upskill and reskill continuously. We're living in a world of climate change, failure to reach any of the UN's 20 sustainability goals, disruptive technologies, AI, XR, and others, and the pandemic, and now the rise of authoritarianism across the world. So lifelong learning is not episodic anymore. It's not something that you do only when you need a promotion or you're going to change careers. It's something that people have to do all the time. And our institute believes that AI, which is part of the problem, can also be part of the solution. Adult learners, it's in the title for a reason. I was fortunate to work with an adult developmentalist as part of the institute. Unfortunately, she passed away this last year. And she would say, if you're in a room like this with 20-year-olds and 40-year-olds and maybe some 60-year-olds, it's a little like trying to give a talk to kindergartners, middle school students, and high school students at the same time. We tend to take a one-size-fits-all approach to adults, but adults are deeply shaped both by aging, which affects the agility of thinking, and by life experience, which gives you a very rich body of knowledge, and we learn by building around the edges of what we already know. So some of what we do is to look at how AI can affect adult learners, as well as other institutes that focus more on K-12 or early learning. Online education is also in the title. There's a reason for that. One of the reasons is that if we're going to help hundreds of millions of adults to continuously learn, that's a huge problem of scale. It's not going to happen solely by bringing people to venues like this and interacting face-to-face, even though that's an important part of it. The sort of anywhere, anytime, anyone theme of online learning that MOOCs failed to do because they had poor pedagogy is still an opportunity. But the other thing to say about it, that online learning that is not often stated, AI needs enormous amounts of data to do things well, enormous amounts of data. It's almost impossible to collect that level of data face-to-face. It's not impossible to collect that level of data online. And it's not impossible to collect that level of data in XR. And one of the reasons that may drive people towards XR is the need to generate the kind of very rich data that AI can use in order to personalize learning. So the problem against which I'm setting this discussion about AI and XR is looking at the challenge of adult learning using online education in order to continue to function in a world that's so chaotic, disruptive, and frankly, dangerous. So what has our institute been up to? Well, as you might expect, AI can do several kinds of things in helping learning. On the front end, it can make the kinds of learning experiences that people have much richer. And I say that AI can do that. I could equally well change a couple things on this slide and say that XR can do that as well. On the back end, AI and machine learning can interpret very rich data streams, process data, coming out of the learning, as you know, because you're working in XR and deal with that kind of process stream. And then reflect back the patterns and the feedback that it's finding to the teacher, to learners, but also, and this is where our institute is specialized, towards AI agents that are partners for the teachers and partners for the learners. And so they add something to the mix on both the front end and the back end that potentially can enrich things quite a bit. Now, when I say enrich things, often what people think about is what we would call micro-learning. So you're in the middle of learning something, maybe you're working with a chatbot and you're interacting with it second by second, that's micro-learning. What we need to pay attention to more is meso-learning, where you look at how somebody does in a class overall based on many micro-learning experiences, or macro-learning, where you look at how someone does in a whole certificate program or whole degree program through many instances of meso-learning. And so this ecosystem of improving learning, whether it's adults or children or anyone else, needs to be able to work at these different levels, because social factors like motivation and emotion and contextual factors like age and family and work really come out in meso-learning and macro-learning, but often are lost in micro-learning. What kinds of theories of learning do we use? Well, one of them is called ICAP, and it's similar to many other theories. It basically says that highly interactive, collaborative, constructive learning is better than passive. Something that a lot of lip service is given to, but unfortunately something that we don't see put into action very often in our university and adult settings. There's also a theory called community of inquiry that those of you who do online learning in particular may be familiar with. Community of inquiry, which applies to all kinds of learning, says there are three kinds of presence that are important. There's cognitive presence, which is often where we focus. How do we keep people's brains working and listening and thinking and interacting? But there's also teaching presence. Not teacher presence only, but teaching presence, where you feel as you're working that there is a kind of surround that you have that is providing continuous guidance, whether active or passive. And then there's social presence, because one of the reasons MOOCs failed is that people felt very isolated. And if people are prepared, even by the best possible AI agents and the best possible XR, if they're prepared to just perform individually, they're not going to succeed in a world where when people go to work, what they're doing is gathering in groups and saying, no one in history has seen this problem before. We don't have any models for how to understand it, but here we are. So let's work together and let's figure it out. That's not just what Imagineers are doing. That's what everybody is doing every single day in this incredibly disruptive time. So, and again, I could substitute XR for AI and keep a lot of these slides. The Institute is looking at different kinds of research thrusts. What can you do with AI agents? Can we do personalization, which is a deep problem in AI? How do we handle human-AI interaction? And my own work in this area deals with not AI, but IA, intelligence augmentation, where when a human being and an AI work together, each does what they do best, then the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And I'll give some examples of that. And then different kinds of data architectures that provide the data that make the AI possible. So we've developed 7 different AI technologies. I'm not going to talk about all of these. Each one comes out of a pain point in adult learning. So Sammy is a social assistant in a large online class. It's kind of like cognitive dating. It suggests people that you might want to know in the class that the system believes would be good learning partners for you, based on a theory of what forms a good support network in terms of learning. SMART deals with concept learning. I have lived long enough that I'm actually pre-digital when I started my career. I would get enormous stacks of physical papers, and the first thing I would have to do for each and every one was to spend 20 minutes correcting the grammar and the spelling before I even got to the content. I was so happy when digital came along and there were spell checkers and grammar checks, because now that part of the process was taken over for me. Smart is an AI agent that does the same thing for the first level, not of syntax, but of semantics, of substance. So Smart might look at a draft of something, of speech of paper, and say, there's 6 dimensions here, you've only got 4 of them. Here's the 2 you're missing, and here's where to look to make that better. Or it might say you've got all 6 dimensions, but 2 and 4 are interrelated, and you haven't caught up on that in your writing. So it's providing a level that, again, takes something off of the human being, so that the human being can do things that the AI can't do. Like read the paper and say, you've got all the dimensions, you've got all the interactions, but this is so boring, people will fall asleep in the second paragraph. And so you've got to find a way to make it interesting if you want to actually have an impact on your audience. And so the agents also go back to this issue of micro, meso, and macro, and they're designed so that among the 7, there are ways of dealing with all these different levels. And in terms of the grounding for this, you can do things with $20 million, obviously, that you can't do with $2 million, or $200,000, or $2,000. And so we've had a lot of data that we've collected about the effectiveness of these tools, the practicality and usability of these tools, and they turned out pretty well. So we have some confidence in them. This is your tax dollars at work. At the end of year 5, they'll be released in different ways. But I only want to focus on one of the agents, because my purpose here is not to give a talk on AI, even though I have so far, but to give a talk on how AI can relate to XR, except that you have to understand what AI can and can't do at this point in order to do that. So one of our tools is called Jill Watson. Jill actually began its development in 2016, 5 years before we were funded. So it's now into its 10th year, and it's evolved from a teaching assistant that was an AI all the way up to what we would call an intellectual partner. So for a particular learning experience like a course at the grain size of something like a course, a full semester learning experience, the student can ask a wide variety of questions about the course that probably span the range of questions that you would reasonably ask a human being. And the AI, with lots of guardrails and lots of specialized services connected with it, can provide accurate answers within that context of the course in order to be effective. So, in fact, if you were dealing online and there was a pretty good representation of an agent to look like a human being, it might be very difficult for you staying with questions within the course to determine whether you were talking to a human being or an AI. The instructors get a dashboard that helps them to understand the pattern of how students are using this and how to personalize the different students. And the system is safe, does well in terms of privacy, does well in terms of security, and we have a bunch of data that suggests that it aids critical thinking and so on. It even, and this is our work in year 5, is capable of being self-improving. Now, we're capable of being self-improving, hopefully. And if the second time you teach a course, you build on what didn't go right the first time you teach it, and the third time even more so, and the fourth time the content changes, so you have to go through it all again. work in Jill Watson now is showing that with some relatively new parts of AI, we're able to help make it self-improving, again, within the specific context of a specific course, so that it gets better over time, even without a human intervention in what's going on. So this is all directed towards the personalization part. This is not completely open-ended. It doesn't cover every possible form of ICAP. There is an agent called Vera that is more completely open-ended. But it does deal with ill-defined problems. And you know there's a lot of hype about tutoring systems. Tutoring systems have been around now for almost 50 years. They work well on a limited range of right answer material. They don't work well on ill-defined problems or open-ended problems because there isn't an apparent answer to tutor. And because anything that AI can teach, AI will be doing in the workplace. It's easier to build workplace AI than teaching AI because AI is black box and you have to make teaching AI glass box. So anything that AI teaches you, if you try to go out and make a living doing, you'll lose. So the whole challenge here is to build something that helps human beings to teach about ill-defined problems and open-ended problems, because AI itself is not going to be capable of doing that. One more piece, and we're ready to talk about it stuff. One of the reasons for building 7 groups is because then you can use more than one at once. So what happens if you have a course with this instructional companion coupled with INKRID, which is a way of making videos intelligent, so that you can literally have a conversation with video, including things that aren't in the video that are related to the video. Coupled with something like Sammy that helps you find a good learning partner, coupled with something like Smart that gives you feedback on partial drafts is what you're doing. How does that work? And is the whole more than the sum of the parts there? And we have suggestive data that indicates that that's so, but in order to achieve it, we need another breakthrough that the institution's working on called A4L, which is the data pipeline, into which you can feed data from each of the tools, data from the student information system, there is one, other kinds of data and other sorts of formats, and synchronize and combine and synthesize all that data. This should sound familiar to those of you working in XR, so that you can draw conclusions from the synchronized streams that are coming out. And that's another piece of what the Institute is doing. So one of the things that I'm looking at and working on is once you have a system like that, you can have what I would call digital communities of practice. Now, you're used to it in universities. You have not only instructors, but you have teaching that mentor, somebody else, like a role. They may know you individually as students better than the instructor does in a large course. And they might, if they're really good, not get in contact about you and how you're doing from their different perspectives of how they can best help you, personalizations. But I guarantee you that they don't talk to people in other courses you're taking, because nobody has that kind of time. The teaching assistant that your mathematics class is not talking about the teaching assistant in your engineering class, is not talking to you about the teaching assistant in the history class. But AI can absolutely. So now we're talking about learning ecosystem in which there's a rich collection of data and with permission, and there's a rich interchange of ways that you can be helpful in every situation by knowing what happened in every episode. Now that sounds kind of pie-in-the-sky and weird to you. Think about our medicals. It's already natural in our medical system, not so much with AI, although that's coming. If you're diabetic and you have a heart condition, your specialist, absolutely, you're talking to your primary physician, and that's a great benefit to you. So the concerns about data privacy are outweighed about the concerns about the opportunities about new ideas. And that brings me to a point that I want to make that's going to guide this third section that's finally about AI. It's okay to do things better. Take what you're already doing. To use AI, XR, or any other technology to automate what you're already doing. Make it faster, to make it more efficient, make it cheaper. It gives you time to do other things. Nothing wrong with that. That is never the big win in a new technology. The big win is never in doing things better. It's doing better things. It's doing things that were impossible, that now become possible because it's one with technology. And the digital communities of practice, where you're exchanging rich information to help somebody personalize their learning, that's a wide range of learning experiences by using digital agents to do that interchange, which is beyond human capabilities given time. That's a doing better thing. So now I want to talk about what kind of doing better things might we have, where are the big wins likely to be if we combine AI into XR today. In terms of what's possible today, without just focusing on doing things better. So my colleague raises Perkins asks the question, what is understanding? And his work is truly wonderful. And what he says, basically, is that understanding involves what we might call adaptive expertise. So, in a course, if you can do all of the problems in the textbook and all of the problems that the instructor comes up with, which in a sense are toy problems, they're problems within an academic setting that are customized to let you understand the basics of what's going on, then you can get really high grades and really high test scores, and people will think that you're really smart. Unfortunately, AI can also get really high grades and high test scores doing exactly the same thing without understanding, because it's typically based on calculative prediction, reckoning. Effective use, deep understanding, involves what we would call adaptive expertise. So you have an irregular state silver liquid. You remember the formula for calculating the area of time. Can you apply that to calculating the amount of cloth that you need for your irregularly shaped silver crystal? That's adaptive expertise. And deep understanding is built in different ways than standard understanding. Now, this all sounds very academic. If you think about auto mechanics. Auto mechanics who grew up in the gasoline era have had to deal with electric cars and hybrid. How much can you transfer from your knowledge from gasoline to electric? Which parts do you have to relearn? Which parts can you do adaptively? Nursing is constantly changing, as it's all the with new therapies, new approaches, new problems, like highly addictive substances. And again, you can't just re-educate yourself every single time. You need adaptive expertise so that without going back to school, you can get better. So how do you teach adaptive expertise? So I'll give a very concrete example out of my own work and my colleagues' work. From 2008 to 2020, we had what we called the eco empire because we got funding for and built 4 different ecosystem science curricula that involve different forms of XR. 3 for middle school, 1 for early elementary, 3 that were through the monitor immersion, 1 that was augmented reality in the real world immersion. And again, I'm not going to describe all of that work in any detail, but the last of the 4 was called Ecolog for 3rd graders. And we felt as if we constantly were doing things that the school system thought were crazy, advanced, that the students wouldn't be able to do. And we found that the students wanted more. So in our ecosystems curricula, the curriculum standards for what we were teaching and learning were high school or college level, not the middle school level. And the middle school students were sort of saying, okay, that was fun. What have you done for me now? So we thought, well, let's go down to 3rd graders and let's see what they can do. And in particular, to really push the limit, we'll not only teach them ecosystem science, we'll teach them computational modeling as well. So all of these involve going into what's simulated for an ecosystem. In the case of Ecolog, this was an ecosystem that changed dramatically over time. First beavers come and build dams to create a pond, and then woodpeckers come to the dead trees, the pond fostered, and dramatically changed the ecosystem again, what's called keystone species. And then the students had to model the features of the woodpecker, but they had a superpower, which is they should become a beaver, or become a woodpecker, right? Here's XR in action. And so they were able, by being the beaver, to think about what they were doing and then put that into the computer model as a program that was involved. And again, what we found is that they needed that and asked for more. And now we have 3rd grade doing work that was thought to be at the high school level. We have terrible glass ceilings over kids. So this is work that's kind of core mixed reality. As you know, it builds on a lot of things that internet games can do. So I asked myself now, 5 years back, or 6 years after we finished Eagle, which was pre-Gen AI, what could we do with Gen AI? What could we do if we took all the things that this AI Allo Institute, this Adult Learning and Online Education Institute could do, and we put it into this 3rd grade curriculum? Well, there's lots of things. One of them is that because Gen AI is natural language processing, now we could feed into the back end conversational interactions in the world, and the conversations could be very rich, because when you're exploring the ecosystem and you bump into the old guy fishing, now instead of having a pre-scripted conversation, you can have an open-ended conversation if you make that person a chatbot. And you can use a verbal interface for programming and movements instead of trying to use a mouse or arrow keys or something else. And instead of just pouring through lots and lots of transcripts, process transcripts, you can use really sophisticated machine learning, including natural language learning, including the conversations that teams of kids are having outside of the environment, but that can be picked up on classroom microphones, which is something that some of the other national AI institutes are working on. Plus, we could say to the kids at the end of the Ecolog, why don't you tell them? Why don't you create a textual description based on what you know of ecosystem science and build something that's in your own community? See how well it comes out as a model. That would have taken it to a whole different level, and yet every one of those things, in a sense, is commonplace now. With current AI, not magic, bullshit, general artificial intelligence, not Hollywood AI, just regular symbolic plus Gen AI working together. So that is something that we're not planning to do it. I mean, and past the point that I was going to start another eco-empire. But it's exciting to think about. Here's another example. I have a colleague in the French department of Harvard. Her name is Nicole Mills. She teaches introduction to French. And she, with the help of me and many others, created a virtual murder mystery in Paris. So there is, learning language involves culture and context. And so he teaches French by giving people a sense of the culture and context of Paris. He does that with creating virtual forms of Paris. This is an art museum, surrealist art museum at the Centre Pompidou. The question is based around the interesting problem that someone has been murdered. And you're a French Sherlock Holmes or a French Poirot, you're all in, trying to solve the mystery. And in order to do so, you have to use a lot of subjunctive French, which is verbal. As a teacher, this is a way that's highly motivating to get students to really push the limits of their subjunctive French. But from the student's point of view, it's highly engaging because they're doing these French speaking chatbots to figure out who murdered who. That's quite practical. Our own students built it. Just took a couple weeks once we knew how to approach it. On a volunteer basis, I and other people without any funding are building a negotiation group thanks to the help of emeritus professor in our business school who's willing to devote his expertise to the subject matter of it. And a big problem in negotiating, back to the problem is that you can take 5 negotiation courses, you can get an A entry, one of them you can have a letter on Harvard stationery saying what 1 + 2 do with it. And you could be completely unable to negotiate, right? Because negotiation is a skill, like saying I just 5 courses in tennis. You know, it's a skill. You either develop it or you don't. And the problem in teaching negotiation is that who you practice it with. Other students don't know how to play in that order, or you arguer, or your boss, or you need a raise. But AI can do that. So what we're building is practice system for negotiating, where in your own language, in your own cultural content, you can interact with a nation that wants to be practiced to the point that you're ready to go into the real world and negotiate some kind of a good deal with an important person in your context. And that gets to a point that I want to make about this Merrick XR and AI. Culture and context situate are essential for expertise. The whole point about being an expert is not that you know a one-size-fits-all answer. It's that you know an answer that in 2 identical situations that seem very, very similar to one, you understand that one you do this and the other is that you do that. And that's not something that AI can get to without XR, because XR is intensely situational, culture, context. AI is intensely cognitive. Or it's the one-size-fits-all. You have to put them together. But the other thing I wanted to point out is let's look beyond AI, and let's go beyond XR. Let's talk about matrices. So in Economic, now we could build it so the kids are given a bunch of physical artifacts, and they're told, why don't you build something that will help one of the animals inside of the ecosystem, and we'll put it in there so they can use it. So one of the things that's going to happen to the beavers is they get eaten by a wolf. What kind of mold defense does would you get? One of the things that happens to the woodpeckers, their beak gets tired and worn out from hammering on the trees. What if you get to woodpeckers kind of an augmented beak that they could put on and wear? I mean, this is silly on one sense because it's 3rd grade. But the point is that the students could build stuff, push it through the fourth wall, into the virtual environment as a digital twin that then could be used in the invited engineering makerspaces. And again, AI is what could make it possible to do that digital twin relatively quickly. So the reason I'm going through these examples is I'm trying to illustrate the range of doing better things. And I'm sure that some of you know better things than I haven't even thought of. But that's where we need to be thinking. Not how do we automate, how do we innovate. Not how do we do the old things faster, but how do we do new transformative things to deal with this crazy world that we're trying to prepare students for. And what keeps me up at night is that 95% of what I read about AI, and probably 60% of what I read about XR, is about automating. It's about doing things better. And I worry that we're creating a kind of digital duct tape to hold together an obsolete industrial era educational system. One of the speakers talked about creativity this morning, and this is something also that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I don't know whether or not AI can be creative, but it's a really interesting proposition to ask. Is one of the doing better things to help human beings be more creators when they're working with an AI partner, publish co-author papers on that topic. And it's really important because if we graduate to know everything that's shown in this point in history, with a wonderful education that makes that possible, we're screwed. Because everything that's known at this point in history is now obsolete. We're living in this disrupted time that doesn't draw on history to help us understand. We need creativity. We need a knowledge generator. That's why I'm talking about third graders, something that combines computer modeling, machine learning, nature spaces, and so on. We need something like that. Even at the third grade level, to get the kind of people that we're going to need graduating. Shakespeare once said, the moon is a thief. She steals her light from the sun. We have AI. AI steals its light from human now. That's what all the training are about. And now we're generating AI's light, and we're feeding it back into the training set. So we're diluting the sunlight with moonlight. That is not going to have a happy ending. But the only way around that is to develop more sunlight, to help human beings create more sunlight. So, I hope that this graphic overview through a lot of things that's been helpful in terms of grounding where we are with AI, suggesting some interesting ways to apply XR, ways that are just illustrative, they're not exhaustive. I'm sure you have other ideas as well. If you found this interesting, slides are available. If you find this interesting, I have this website that involves just lots and lots of stuff. Keynote speeches, videos, blogs, research articles, websites, whatever. Come in, buffer around, see what you can find. And thank you for allowing me to share.
I just had to speak and some stuff we can look at. Oh, you're on the microphone. First of all, tonight. First of all, thank you for the students and the sort of what to say. Standards, stuff that totally makes sense. And I want some of these, like we talked earlier. Thanks a lot.
If you turn the button on, it comes on. I'm a humanist, what do I know? Thank you. This was really stunning and provocative and makes perfect sense in every single way, so I'm delighted. There was one interesting part though where you said you had evidence going through that using all of this increased people's capacity for critical thinking. So I have two questions. A, can you say a little bit more about what the criteria you use to say what critical thinking is being enhanced, and how you think these resources will change what we understand by critical thinking? We think a big deal about college is to teach people to think critically. But A, what did you mean when you said it helped them do it, as opposed to simply repeating what they learned? And then how is this going to change what we even think of the core elements of advanced learning about critical thinking?
So you're right that critical thinking is this area of multi-dimensional concept, and that I'm not making a claim that we're studying every dimension to critics, whether or not it is increasing. But what did we study? There are classification systems for questions. What constitutes as really good question? And those typically have 5, but they run to the whole one, which is a question and the answer is with a fact. Comma 5, which is a question that maybe a group of experts in a week could circle around and circle around the try to figure out the good side. And there are AI systems now developed in part by Oykhman and Stanbury that if you type in a question you have, it'll classify. It'll tell you which level of defiance it's at, and it will tell you what you would need to do to get to the next level with that question. I urge you to look up Oykhman and his question system if you're interested in experiencing it. So what we did is we classified the questions that students were asking in class on the 5-level system, and we were able to show significant gains in the classes that had no one and very classes that didn't. Now, is that a blanket measure? No, it's not, but it's a suggestion. Let's go.
Is it going to change with all this, what we understand critical thinking to mean?
Well, I think that we know from human experience that if you have people with different knowledge than a group, and you have a conducive atmosphere towards synthesizing that knowledge collectively, so that everybody's thinking goes up. And so the question is, could some parts of that be stimulated by both X and R, which brings culture, context, situation into it, and by AI, which brings, this kind of natural language processing and recall that you. And obviously, a lot of things want to put on papers that don't work in practice, and I don't want to say yes, it will. But I think it's promising.
Hello, I'm Ariel Barron-Robbins. I'm in the FIU art department. So I was interested in what you were saying at the end. By the way, this is one of the best keynote speakers I've been to. I just was writing down all sorts of notes. But we were talking about creativity at the end. I also follow this philosopher named Reza Negarstani. I'm probably butchering that. Yeah.
I saw your comment. Yeah.
Well, anyway, but and he talks about how AI's creativity is completely different from human creativity, and that comparing the two is useless. But here's the thing that I'm really interested in, is he talks about, do we even know the limits of human creativity? So when we talk about do we know the limits of creativity? And if we don't, how can we talk about creativity sort of in conversation with AI? If that makes sense. Do you think there's two different types, or do you think what do you think about what he is writing?
Well, the first thing I think is this is something that applies, but I think that The work that I've done with colleagues in creativity is about a narrow form of creativity, if you will. It's creativity in which there is a practical, real world benefit, and that is constraining some character or movement and creativity. So it's not just how unusual it is, but also it's just unusual in a way that provides measuring something that's just important to us. I would agree that AI creativity is necessarily going to get into creativity because AI thinks in a way that no biological organism, probably anywhere in the universe, would think. No biological organism would ever, or utters this one word it's just not something that would naturally keep up, but something that makes sense with digital. So what I would say is, if creativity is narrow to something that others can understand in a way that tells them it's true to them, then, and humans communicate with AI, it would depend on the extent to which the AI is capable of creating that kind of communication. And I don't feel that we know that at this point, real later at night. Yeah. Do we have time for one more?
Sure.
Just one more.
My name is Damien. I'm from Oakland. One of the things I was really interested in, what you were saying, was this idea of creating concepts where humans and AI are working side by side, where one is doing what that it does best and the person is doing what it does best. I work a little bit with some high school students, and one of the things that I've noticed, especially even with like the most bright ones where we're working with language models and kind of just text input, I feel like I've seen them kind of become more subservient to the AI. And what I'm wondering is, how have you either seen that play out with your students, or what kind of methodology are you kind of recommending to be able to combat that? Because it's a pattern that I'm seeing kind of more and more.
Yeah, it is a major concern, and I have on my website whole speeches about AI literacy, talked about how to define AI literacy in a way that stops being all friends, trying to take shortcuts. I guess the quick answer is that learning is a journey, but too often people focus on destinations. So, in learning experiences as a proxy for the journey, if we can, we ask for a problem. Righteousness, do this thing to me, righteous to do your program, do this marketing plan. And the assumption is that if you took the journey in order to be able to create the proxy, but AI can sort of serve that journey in a lot of ways. And one of the things that is true for all of the tools that I described for this institute, and actually all the tools of the other national AI institutes that relate to education, is to deliberately set up in a way that doesn't enable students to short circuit if they uses the AI. But that is just what the companies should do. And that is just what a lot of the apps do. And because AI is not a level of super intelligence, it's very good at calculated prediction, reckoning, but it's not good at applied wisdom, judgment, which is what human beings are good at. I've always got talks about IA, where I spend about an hour trying to wrestle with that. The trick is to persuade students that they're losing their voice, they're losing their identity. I had a colleague who ran a search for an unpaid internship, got 200 applications, and she was just horrified. How am I going to get this 200? And then she found that 190 of them were personally identical, because the students had put them down as turned into AIs and did the letters for them. So that eliminated 190 candidates right off the bat, which do nothing about it, other than how to be like ally. Because AI is that situation. it's not customized to you. It'll give the same answer to everyone. That's where it seems to me XR, I'd say, if there's one thing I would say in this talk to you, it's that you have something that the AI companies cannot get, no matter how many billions of dollars they throw at it out. And that is a rich knowledge of context and culture, the situations, and the ways that human beings respond to their surroundings. And this and the rich data that comes off of that are a strength complemented in ways that are just beginning to understand. But two better days, nothing's better. Thank you.
Chris Dede, everybody.